What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Patrick, aka Addicted to Combat, back for another week of UFC action, and we have UFC 291, a very good star-studded pay-per-view this Saturday, featuring the symbolic BMF title hanging in the balance in the main event, potentially 5 rounds of lightweight action between two men who are familiar fighting one another. That's Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, Part 2. 5 years in the making since this rematch. A lot has happened to both of them, so can't wait to see this competitive lightweight match. Co-main event has title implications as well between the light heavyweights' former champion, Jan Blachowicz, as he takes on and welcomes Alex Pereira to the light heavyweight division in the UFC. So can't wait for that. We've got 12 fights in total, a couple short notice replacements on the prelims, but overall, really exciting fights to break down and some really close ones to call, especially since this fight card is at altitude. That will be a common theme I'll be pointing out during these breakdowns. So hit the like, hit the subscribe. Let's break into the first prelim of the night. First fight of the prelims at women's flyweight, we've got Miranda Maverick taking on Priscilla Cachoeira, and this is one of the easier fights on the entire card to break down. Should be a pretty quick one. You've got a wrestler versus a striker here. Miranda Maverick often finds herself as a sizable favorite because her wrestling game plan is so strong and dominant. Often she can rack up strong control on people, get the grounded, pounded, potentially even look for a submission. She finds herself about a -300 to -360 favorite. I'm looking at Priscilla Cachoeira right around +250, the underdog, as the Brazilian aggressive striker who actually is very powerful, very physically imposing, but she does struggle to make this weight class. She's failed a couple of times, including recently she was supposed to take on Karine Silva, and I think Cachoeira weighed in 4 pounds over the limit at 130 pounds, so not the best sign of things to come here. Hopefully she makes weight on Saturday, but 1 year ago she did show her power in round 1, 65-second knockout over Ariane Lipski. That was, again, up at bantamweight because I think at that time last year it was Lipski who was struggling to make 125. So hopefully Cachoeira does show up here. She shows up in shape. She does have decent cardio, a very good come-forward style, but her striking defense is terrible and her takedown defense even worse. So any woman that has tried to take down Cachoeira has been successful. That includes the former champion Shevchenko, that includes Molly McCann, and that includes Jillian Robertson, who took her down and subbed her within 1 round. So poor striking defense, poor takedown defense. I think Miranda Maverick should have an okay time here. I know she dropped the ball as a big favorite against Jasmine Jasudavicius last time out, but you got to remember that Jasudavicius is also a wrestler. The other loss that she had in the UFC was against Erin Blanchfield, again, dominant grappler. And her other loss was one that should have gone her way in a split decision result, but she does have a loss to Macy Barber. Again, somebody who's very hard to hold down, very physically strong. So I think Miranda Maverick should cruise to a decision victory here, but I think there's a good chance that she could probably finish this inside the distance, since, again, she'll probably have a lot of time to work in advanced positions. Hasn't been the most prolific finisher in the UFC, but she's been facing some pretty tough competition. I'll take Miranda Maverick to get this done inside the distance, whether it be from ground and pound strikes or more likely a submission win. Welterweight bout up next between Matt Semelsberger and Uros Medic, and this is a short notice spot here for Uros Medic, who actually makes his UFC debut at 170. He's been in the UFC at 155 previously, and his last win was a knockout one over Omar Morales last year. It's been since last May since we've seen Medic. I think he had maybe a hand injury or something he was healing up. I can't quite remember, but he's 8-1 as a professional out of the Alaskan regional scene, and usually that's a red flag, but he's proven himself against a Dana White Contender Series opponent. He dismantled. Same with Alan Cruz in his debut. Very quick work of that guy by knockout. The only time we've seen him lose ever was against Jalen Turner a year and a half ago. He got taken down off of a caught kick, hurt on the mat, and then submitted all within 1 round. But, Jalen Turner's pretty darn good, so we can kind of forgive that one as well. But Uros Medic brings a lot of really quick finishing ability, good speed in round 1. He's got a nice southpaw stance. He jabs out of, throws wide hooks, but also good kicks to all targets of his opponents as well. I gotta say, making a short notice spot here up a weight class at altitude, and you're a quick finisher, that does not bode well against the skill set of Matt Semelsberger, who's proven to be pretty explosive himself early. He switches stances well, but out of that orthodox stance, his right cross is a laser beam, knocking out guys like Jason Witt and Martin Sano in under a minute each, but also knocking down 6 of his 8 opponents in the UFC so far. And that includes Jeremiah Wells twice in his last bout, which he ultimately lost a very close decision to Wells. But he also had that dominant decision victory over Jake Matthews last year, where he knocked him down and took him down once apiece in each round. So Semelsberger, I think, brings a more well-rounded game here. He's very durable. He's got good cardio. And again, he's got that ability to be explosive early, but also time and preserve his energy for a later fight as well. The only losses he's had in the UFC are to the very powerful and dangerous Chaos Williams, which is a close competitive fight. He also lost to, of course, Jeremiah Wells, who's explosive as a grappler and a striker, and the consistent and very experienced Alex Morono in a decently close fight as well. So all decision results in his losses here, and he's taking on Uroš Medic, who's going to expect to steamroller him early with like a round 1 or early round 2 knockout. I don't see that happening in this spot, so give me Semelsberger pretty confidently. I took him for 2 units at minus 165. I think that price still exists. Actually, it just moved. It's right around minus 185 to minus 200 on most books now, but I'm still very confident in Semelsberger. I think he gets an inside-the-distance victory, probably a round 1 or round 2 knockout here. Flyweight bout up next between CJ Vergara and Vinicius Salvador. A pretty exciting flyweight bout between two guys who are aggressive strikers primarily, and it's going to be cool to see which one puts the other on their back foot first in round 1. But starting on the Vinicius Salvador side, this guy is a 100% finisher in all 14 of his wins, 13 by knockout, 1 by submission. He's a Brazilian kickboxer with a very athletic, creative style. Showboats, keeps his hands down, constantly switching stances, and has a lot of spinning attacks that can land pretty effectively when they do, but the guy just has a style that I can't really rely on at this level. I don't think he's as talented as he thinks he is with all of these movements, but he did score that amazing round 2 and dominant round 1 victory on the Contender Series over Shannon Ross. But we see Shannon Ross can not even take one punch in the UFC at this point. So where that really rates his power for Salvador, I'm not quite sure, but he's coming off of his debut loss at the hands of Victor Altamirano, who was able to mix in wrestling, boxing counters, and just keep Salvador honest over 3 rounds and, soundly get the decision win. I think CJ Vergara could do something very similar. We saw Vergara against Clayton Rodriguez, who's far more dangerous and well-rounded than Salvador, in my opinion. Vergara was able to push him on his back foot, actually have some reversals and ability on the mat to counter Clayton Rodriguez, and Vergara, as a big underdog, actually stole that split decision victory. So, controversial or not, it was close enough to be a split, and Vergara logged that as one of his 2 UFC wins. He also has 2 losses to Ode Osborne and Tatsuro Taira. So, coming off of a devastating round 1 for CJ Vergara against Daniel Da Silva a couple months ago, he ate a spinning heel kick to the face and just could barely keep his composure in round 1, had to sprint around the octagon to keep himself in the fight, but just knowing that if he got to round 2, Da Silva would likely gas out and hand Vergara the win, and that's exactly what happened. So Vergara could possibly do that here against Salvador, even at high altitude for flyweights. I think Salvador does have more of the energy expending style with all of the wild kicks and just, energy wasting movements here. I think Vergara could probably find an inside the distance finish in the later part of this fight, round 2, round 3, whereas Salvador, I think, would have his best chances early in the matchup, the way that Daniel Da Silva did. So the difference maker would be CJ Vergara using his wrestling, which is the clear weakness for Salvador. I can't count on Vergara to do it, but I think that would be the clearest path to victory. It's keeping him honest with the striking, pressuring forward, and eventually mixing in takedowns. I'm going to take Vergara to win inside the distance here. In fact, I like the unders more than I like a side on the money line for this one. CJ Vergara, minus 150, the favorite. I'm seeing a lot of people, even on Twitter so far, have happened to sneak a peek at some people's opinions of this fight, which I normally don't like to do before I do my own tape, but I see people calling Vergara a lock or a very confident parlay piece. I don't really see it. I think he's still in a big danger of getting stopped early just from his lack of head movement, but I'll take Vergara to win. The under 2.5 is around minus 165 on BetOnline. I'd rather play that if I had to than play a side in this fight. I do think somebody goes out. before the scorecards are read. So give me CJ Vergara to be that man getting his hand raised. Welterweight bout up next between Jake Matthews and Darius Flowers. And Darius Flowers makes his debut this Saturday on short notice, filling in for Miguel Baeza. But we did see Flowers last season of the Contender Series score an underdog win via round 1 slam TKO over the Georgian Gogoladze. So pretty impressive stuff there. And before that, Darius Flowers was on like a 3-fight win streak, all by stoppage, and all within 3 weeks of each other before the Dana White Contender Series. So this guy is ready on short notice to fight any place, anytime, and he does have a genuine belief in himself. And Flowers has genuine knockout power in either hand, one-punch knockout power, and he has shown an ability to wrestle as well from time to time. So having a 4-1 streak in the LFA, his boxing looks pretty crisp, but overall this guy is sort of an early finisher or bust type of guy. You know, out of 12 wins, he's got 8 knockouts and 1 submission, I believe. I think all but one of those 9 finishes come under the 1.5 round mark. And in all of his losses, all 5 of them have been by stoppage. That's 4 submissions and 1 TKO loss as well. So the guy had a long amateur career from like age, I want to say 18 to 20 before his pro career. So he's had a lot of experience and even has a record of pro boxing where I think he went, if the records are correct, I saw it was like a 1-10 record in boxing with several stoppages as well against him. So, you know, there's a lot of unknowns with Darius Flowers, but he seems like a complete wild card of an opponent and a guy who probably shouldn't be this big of an underdog with his power in the clinch. Jake Matthews about a -300, -325 favorite. Darius Flowers around that +245 underdog mark. So, man, a couple years ago, you saw him face Darius Flowers versus Bobby Volker, who is a former UFC veteran of a few fights and just a knockout artist in his own right. Darius Flowers had Bobby Volker in all sorts of trouble, tried to put him away in round 1, and then completely gassed out in round 2. He death gassed and got knocked out himself for that lone TKO stoppage. So at altitude, as such a muscular former middleweight, short, stocky guy, I think Flowers is at risk of, you know, if he can't get that early knockout on Jake Matthews, I think he finds himself kind of like a dead man walking in round 2, round 3. So give me Jake Matthews to get the job done here, but I will say that money line is probably a bit too wide. I think Darius Flowers just has this quality about him where I feel like he always has to look like he knows something. You know, this guy has a genuine belief in himself. I think he's pretty fearless after all the losses he's taken in his career so far. And I think he's going to go out there and perform better than his money line indicates. So I might have a piece of Darius Flowers round 1 knockout if I can get a good price on that. But overall, my prediction is Jake Matthews to win in rounds 2 and rounds 3. Just using that more technical striking, leaning on his experience with the wrestling and his gas tank here. Middleweight bout up next between 2 strikers in Roman Kopylov and Claudio Ribeiro. We've got Kopylov, who's 2-2 in the league right now, coming off of back-to-back TKO stoppages. He's the Russian combat sambo fighter, a southpaw striker, and a guy who did not really impress me when he came into the UFC and dropped back-to-back losses. His cardio seemed a little bit suspect to me, but he is proving to have some real potential here. He's decently sized for the weight class, and he took out Alessio Di Chirico in round 3, and he just took out Punahele Soriano with a series of really well-placed body strikes in round 2 for the knockout in January. So looking like there's some improvements made. He maybe is getting his footing in the league at 32 years old, but still a finisher. Out of his 10 wins, 9 of them are by knockout. So Claudio Ribeiro is not alone in that. He's also, he can one-up Kopylov in that stat. He's got 11 wins, all 11 by knockout. So he's a 100% finisher in his wins. Ribeiro's going to have a size advantage here. He's just physically more muscular, keeps a nice wide stance. You can see the thickness and muscularity in his legs, and he's able to stay light on his feet and dart in and out, delivering wildly looping strikes that if they land, there's a good chance you're not waking up for a while. But he showed in his last fight against Joseph Holmes that he's adapted more of a clinch bullying style. He can work some cage wrestling and even get some offensive takedowns and land heavy ground and pound, which is how he finished Joseph Holmes in round 2 of their last fight. So he kind of went back to the drawing board after dropping his debut in a loss to Abdul Razak Al Hassan, who bullied Ribeiro in the clinch, tired him out, and knocked him out in round 2. So yeah, I mean, Ribeiro looks like he's improving. Kopylov looks like he's improving. still, neither guy do I trust their cardio all that much. I've seen Kopylov slow down in just about every fight, and I've seen Ribeiro have such explosive power early. Those guys usually don't sustain the cardio for very long. So Kopylov definitely going to have the ability to let Ribeiro swing and miss and capitalize on him with very technical striking. He's got a nice jab, nice 1-2, and he can really just touch, and then, land a power strike with, the kicks to the body or whatever he finished Punahele Soriano with. I think he's the much more consistent, calculated, precise fighter for sure, but should he be a minus 250 here? I don't think so. So I definitely had to jump on Ribeiro at plus 210 on BetOnline. I put 0.75 units, just 3/4 of 1 unit on him as an underdog. I think this money line is super mispriced when you have two guys who I think have questionable cardio, both improving. I don't know at which rate, and there's still a lot to learn about both guys here. So add in the altitude concerns to exacerbate whoever's cardio fails first. This could get really sloppy here. So give me Ribeiro to probably by the easiest path to victory, like a round 2 knockout early on. But yeah, I'm just taking the mispriced money line in my eyes, and I'm taking that small stab, 0.75 units on Ribeiro as a big underdog here. The only heavyweight fight is up next on the prelims. We've got Derek Lewis taking on Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Super fun matchup here. Could be a bloodbath early, could be boring late. It all depends on how these guys conserve their energy because, again, heavyweights that weigh in towards the end of the weight class limit. Both guys have had questionable cardio as strikers before, and this will now, of course, be at altitude. So we got to consider these things. Derek Lewis coming off of 3 consecutive losses at the hands of Sergey Spivak by submission, Pavlovich and Tuivasa both by knockout. So Derek Lewis, a guy who's a feared striker himself, that's pretty much all he is, although he does have more than just his hands. Sometimes he does have his high kicks, some knees and things like that, some clinch weapons. He is a bit more fast and athletic than people give him credit for, but he is 38 years old, going towards the end of his career, and usually using that slow plotting style where he slowly cuts off the cage and then blitzes when he has you trapped. Lately, he's been starting off really fast and aggressive, and that's been getting him into trouble. So we'll see how he does against Marcos de Lima, who's a former 205er, now a guy who weighs in closer to like 260 at heavyweight. A former kickboxer, Marcos de Lima is a guy who generally does not have very good cardio at all. Out of his 21 wins, 14 of them are by knockout, 3 by submission, and all of those 17 finishes come under 1.5 rounds. After that, he kind of just has to cruise his way to a decision result, hopefully not getting finished himself, although his kryptonite is certainly the wrestling and the submission defense. He's been submitted in the UFC alone 5 times. Of course, the submission defense, not something that's really going to be exposed by Derek Lewis in most worlds, but it's worth noting, and I think it is some of that bad cardio that leads to those issues for Rogerio de Lima. Now, can Lewis, conserve his energy by just not throwing a ton of output? He's certainly done that before. He's won fights in rounds 2, 3, and 4 by a knockout before. It's possible if de Lima slows down later in the fight, his defense will then slow down. He won't be as quick of an evasive mover. He could get knocked out from Derek Lewis as he gets tired. But I think de Lima, if he can just keep this, at range, just throwing heavy, irritating leg kicks to Derek Lewis, using his fast hand speed to stick and move, possibly even some clinch work to help tire Derek Lewis out. That would be a little bit more dangerous, but that's something that I could see de Lima doing. And he could even lean on that to rest and recover himself later in the fight when they're both dead tired. So I think if it's not de Lima early under 1.5 rounds, if it's not Lewis early under 1.5 rounds of the one-punch knockout, this could get ugly, and this could get like a very exhausted fat heavyweight affair, and it could actually stretch over and all the way to decision. So de Lima by decision is actually catching my eye here. That's going to be some big plus money on the props. I want to say closer to like plus 300 to 400. I'm going to wait for some other books like DraftKings to open that up, but that would actually be going against the stats a little bit because Derek Lewis has never once lost in the UFC by decision. He's had some close calls, though, some split decision results, but I don't think de Lima is going to be as successful with getting Derek Lewis to the mat or holding him there, even though that's how some of de Lima's decision wins have resulted. I think this will be purely off of output. It'll be more of a boring fight in the second half, and I think with the altitude, it'll slow these guys down and make them less dangerous. So Kind of a hot take here, but give me De Lima to win by decision here. Derek Lewis is getting one of the biggest step downs in competition he's had in a while. So is he a live underdog? Absolutely. But it's very hard to cap a fight just expecting him to land that one-punch knockout power at some point when, he's been kind of on a lack of momentum here. So give me De Lima by decision. Another welterweight bout up next between Trevin Giles and Gabriel Bonfim. Yet another spot where they're giving Trevin Giles, a young, upcoming, powerful finisher. He fought Dricus du Plessis at middleweight early on. Got knocked out by him in round 2. And he fought the young and upcoming welterweight Michael Morales, who was an undefeated fighter, still is. And he knocked out Trevin Giles within 1 round. So Gabriel Bonfim, the younger of the Brazilian Bonfim brothers, this one making his second walk to the cage now. 25 years old. He's got a 100% finish rate, 14 wins, 0 losses. And this guy has got very opportunistic submission potential, a little bit more well-rounded than his brother Ismail, who just tasted his first defeat. First defeat in the UFC, I should say. So hopefully Gabriel Bonfim doesn't follow that trend and lose here. He's a sizable favorite at -310. Trevin Giles could be had about +250, the underdog, which I think is wide, because there's a couple of things going against Bonfim. Not only is he, less experienced in the UFC, but he's never been to a scorecard before. He's 14-0, 3 knockouts, 11 submissions, whereas Trevin Giles is 5-0 in decision results. Some of them close, but Trevin Giles is very good at being athletic, striking very effectively with nice long punches, a nice stiff jab. He's fast, he's elusive, and he's got very good submission defense on the mat as well. I believe a BJJ black belt in his own right. So even though he's had some inactive performances, the one last year against Louis Koski, not great urgency in that win. Fighting Preston Parsons to a split decision result last time, getting the win narrowly there, even getting hurt against Preston Parsons. These aren't good looks, and for these reasons at 170, I think Bonfim should be the rightful favorite. I think he does show more potential. He just got faster hand speed, and both guys here in Giles and Bonfim are well-rounded. I just think Bonfim is more dangerous in all of those skills. So how I could see this going poorly for Bonfim is, again, he does have a lot of late finishes, but he's never been to a scorecard. So if he gasses out in this spot, that could be a spot where, Trevin Giles could just show more veteran tenacity to finish strong in the match. But another real key spot I could see is Bonfim doesn't necessarily offensively wrestle all that much, nor does he need to. His striking is very good, but when guys don't want to strike with him anymore, they're getting out kickboxed on the feet, they will try to panic wrestle, and in those spots where they give up their neck or a limb, Bonfim will jump on submissions. If Trevin Giles does, give something that looks like a submission opportunity for Bonfim, Bonfim could aggressively jump on something, look like he's going to get the finish, and Trevin Giles is very good at ending up in top position, which is why I picked him to win his last bout against Parsons, and I called it by split decision, just because of how crafty Trevin Giles is. He's very, he's oddly durable, he's oddly opportunistic with ending up in a dominant position on the mat. I just think he's very underrated there, but not underrated enough for me to pick him as a dog here. I think Bonfim should be the rightful favorite. Will I trust him at -315? Probably not. But will I maybe be interested in an inside the distance, prop on Bonfim to cut down that number? That could be a spot you could look at. I'm not sure what that's going to be yet, but I'm going to call Bonfim inside the distance, probably by knockout and probably early. You got to remember that Bonfim does have a 100% finish rate in all of his wins. Trevin Giles also has a 100% finish rate in all of his losses, losing both by knockout and submission twice apiece. So, give me the younger man, the guy who looks like he's got more potential, the undefeated Gabriel Bonfim inside the distance. On to the main card, we have a welterweight bout between Michael Chiesa and Kevin Holland. Exactly what it sounds like it's going to be. It's a grappler versus a striker matchup where we've got Chiesa, a very strong wrestler that blends together a submission wrestling game, and he's taking on Kevin Holland, who's a long, rangy kickboxer that prefers to keep the fight standing because he's 6'3" with an 81-inch reach at the weight class, now 3-1 at welterweight. He's transitioned to this weight class very well, coming down from middleweight, where he went 5-0 in 2020 and then got kind of bullied out of the weight class in 2021. Back-to-back dominant losses to Derek Brunson and Marvin Vettori, and then a no contest against Chris Daukaus. Sent him packing down to getting on a diet and getting down to this weight class. So he's done pretty well for himself. Still has that power at 170 that he carried at 185. Very unorthodox strikes for Kevin Holland. Even hammer fists and back fists are still devastating strikes to his opponents that he can knock them out with. So very sharp, powerful strikes, the accurate boxing, great kicks to all angles. These are all in the tool set for Kevin Holland. And I got to say, the guy just has very poor fight IQ and makes it very hard for me to trust him. And I am a little bit biased against Kevin Holland after trusting him last year, 7 months ago against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, a fight that he had a chance to win even with a broken hand. He chose not to engage in the grappling where he had a clear edge. Stephen Thompson had come off of back-to-back losses from getting taken down and held down by guys with good BJJ like Gilbert Burns, Bilal Muhammad, and Kevin Holland even found a chance to get the fight to the mat a couple of times. I think he scored 2 takedowns and chose to stand right back up with a broken hand and chose to lose by round 4 TKO in between rounds by Stephen Thompson, who kicked his face off, outpaced him, and was just the better man that night. So hard to trust Kevin Holland when he just doesn't have very good resolve in the fight. He gets taken down and dominated in the grappling against Brunson. He's kind of just trolling and showboating the whole time, not really working to get back up to his feet. Same thing against Vettori. So he's got a clear grappling disadvantage in all fights. He's got a clear, mental IQ lapse in his fights as well. Chooses not to use all of his tools in a fight. I find it very hard to back this guy in really any aspect that's not like the unders or something like that. But taking on Michael Chiesa, Chiesa's a guy who is at a clear disadvantage in the striking. He's a guy who lands very little strikes in a fight. He just wants to paw his way in range, stay at distance, at safety, and then close the distance on his own terms, just looking to clinch up, get the body lock and the trip takedown. So he's very good at doing that strategy, and I could see that working against Kevin Holland. The last time Chiesa fought was against Sean Brady, so a fellow grappler there he lost the decision to. Before that, Vicente Luque and him had a very back-and-forth grappling round 1 where he got out-transitioned and lost by sub. But before that, it was against a long, rangy opponent in Neil Magny, who's big for the weight class, not as dangerous as Kevin Holland, but has the same height and reach, and a guy with a lot of experience, and Michael Chiesa able to close that distance and peel him to the ground. 4 out of 5 rounds, getting a ton of control time and winning 49-46 pretty easily. So I could see that actually playing out for Michael Chiesa. I'm going to pick him to win by decision here. I think it's a smothering, wrestling-based decision. I think he can close that distance, catch Holland overswinging early, and kind of break his will early into this fight with his wrestling top pressure. So I'm sure the under in this spot, the under 2.5, will be a popular play this week, especially since it opened around -115 or so. I don't mind it at that price, but where it's at now, -165 to -175 for the under 2.5, I think that correlates more towards a Holland finish, likely a knockout, than it does a Michael Chiesa finish, right? Michael Chiesa never really knocking anybody out or being a threat on the feet. He would have to win this by submission, which is possible, but Kevin Holland, as bad as his takedown defense is and his get-up ability is, he still is decent at squirming around. He does have a BJJ black belt. I think his submission defense will be on point, but if Chiesa wins, I think there's a good chance it's by decision, which is sitting around like +285. Hopefully we can get +300 or more on some books, so I might take a sprinkle on that. Give me the underdog Chiesa to use his strengths, which happen to be Kevin Holland's weakness here. Lightweight bout up next between Bobby Green and Tony Ferguson. I'll try to keep this one fairly concise because I'm going with Bobby Green as a clear pick here. Not much you can do with a -400 Bobby Green, and a +300 Tony Ferguson definitely looks enticing, but Tony Ferguson is on such a fall from grace right now. 5 losses in a row, and the last one was the most embarrassing and unforgivable. He got finished by guillotine, almost a club and sub in round 4 at the hands of Nate Diaz last September. So Diaz, a guy who's been mentally and physically checked out of the UFC's roster for a long time himself, and he was able to stop Tony Ferguson as the fight went on. Pretty crazy result there, but not like it wasn't expected. We've seen the best out of Tony Ferguson in his past. He was on a 12-fight winning streak in the league, and after the loss to Justin Gaethje in round 5 of their war, it was just nonstop consecutive losses. The Oliveira decision, the Dariush decision, the Michael Chandler round 2 knockout after a decent start from Ferguson, and now the worst of all, that Nate Diaz round 4 submission loss. And that was at 170, so now Ferguson's got to go back down to 155. I don't think he'll look much better than he did last time out. So a guy who relied on a very speed and reflex-oriented style of movement, right? Just constant movement, stance switching from Ferguson, constant feints and pressure, and a guy who relied on kind of zombieing through strikes and eating a lot of punishment and tiring out his opponents in a war of attrition every time. Ferguson was a guy with opportunistic submissions as well, good front chokes and things like that. I guess that's still on the table, but as far as the striking goes, I think his speed and reflexes and his durability is certainly lacking now. Compared to Bobby Green, who sort of has a similar movement style, keeps the hands low, switches stances, showboats and feints and things like that, but still good durability. I think he's just far better and closer to his prime at this point. At 36, Bobby Green is still mixing it up with high-level lightweights. So even though he came off of that Jared Gordon no contest, I think he was en route to win that fight either way. I had a lot of faith in him to win that fight inside the distance. It sucked that the headbutt was kind of the culprit to that not counting, but I think Bobby Green will be fired up now to get that performance bonus back, get his win bonus back here, and probably finish Tony Ferguson within 1 or 2 rounds. One of the rare knockout wins for Bobby Green in the UFC was over Al Iaquinta, who was far past his prime and coming back after a sizable layoff. So I think a similar fate awaits Tony Ferguson here. It's going to be sad. I know he's a fan favorite, certainly a favorite of mine, but give me Bobby Green inside the distance by knockout. I guess this could happen at any point in the fight, but I think it's going to be under 1.5 rounds for Bobby Green. Another welterweight bout up next between Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Michel Pereira. This is a striker versus striker matchup at a very high level, and this is an old versus young matchup because Stephen Thompson, now 40 years old, a decade in the UFC, challenged for the belt a couple of times unsuccessfully, and he had a kickboxing career professionally before any of this really began. So he's had a lot of miles on him, but he still moves very, very well as a karate stance fighter, one of the best guys to use that style since Lyoto Machida. Michel Pereira, the young Brazilian at 29 years old, has more of a capoeira style, but a very slick movement, very good elusively, and a good in-and-out movement, just like Stephen Thompson. But Michel Pereira, I think, is more of the explosive athlete of the two, which has its pros and cons, right? Like, he's a very good finisher, very big for the weight classes, Pereira, and he can close the distance with long boxing combinations, long 1-2s, looping hooks he can slide in range with, and he's got good kicks to all angles. But I think with that explosive ability and that fast twitch muscle fiber, I think comes the trade-off of his gas tank is not really prepared for an extended 3-round performance. He's going to really have to work to improve. And he's done so. He's not using all of the backflips and things like that he used to use. He's more measured, but I still think he's going to have to land the more damaging, eye-catching shots when he can land. And I think it is going to be Stephen Thompson that's touching, doing more minute winning, and landing the higher output striking numbers. Thompson is a guy who has repeatedly proved to go for 3 rounds, for 5 rounds, and do it at a very, very high triple-digit or more level the entire time in terms of the strike count. So coming off of just one of those performances last December against a young, dangerous Kevin Holland, he endured the early power threat from Kevin Holland and then went on to do better numbers striking-wise each round, going into stopping him in between rounds 4 and rounds 5. So again, just efficient movement, good accuracy with his kicks, and very, very good defense and cardio. Stephen Thompson still moves very well at 40, so I'm going to favor him to win this match. Now, I wasn't crazy about laying a minus 200 price tag on Stephen Thompson at 40. I wasn't going to have any of it. But now that it's moving down and people are taking the money line of Michel Pereira so heavily, we're getting like minus 150 for Stephen Thompson. If that sneaks down to like minus 145, minus 140 as the week goes on, I'll have a money line bet on Stephen Thompson. I think you give him a fellow striker, and he does very, very well. Even at 40 years old, I haven't seen too much regression yet. So Michel Pereira, he could win, by just landing the better strikes. He could win by finally cracking the durability the way that Anthony Pettis did on Stephen Thompson. And Stephen Thompson, his weakness is, of course, the grappling, right? The heavy wrestling threat. I just don't think that's a good use of Michel Pereira's gas tank in this fight, especially at altitude. He's a guy who has taken down Andre Fiallo. He's taken down Nico Price and even taken down Chaos Williams. But he never held much control time, never did much with those positions. I just don't think that with the elusive movement, the good takedown defense of Stephen Thompson, I think that's a waste of time and energy trying to take down Stephen Thompson here for Pereira. So I think Pereira, as the younger man, should just test his chances at trying to outstrike him and do the better work. But I don't think it's enough. Give me Stephen Thompson to win by decision here. And we've made it to the co-main event of the pay-per-view card. We've got the 205-pound bout between former champion at the weight class, Jan Blachowicz, as he welcomes Alex Pereira to the weight class for the first time in the UFC. But it's a rare case where Alex Pereira, the former Glory kickboxer, in 2 weight classes, is not a stranger to fighting at this division. You know, he was the champion in Glory at 209 pounds, which is their light heavyweight division. And he's a guy who, moving up from middleweight here, is actually going to be the bigger man than his light heavyweight counterpart on Saturday. You know, he's 6'4" with an 80-inch reach and a giant frame, still making a drastic weight cut to even make 205 come Saturday. So he's going to be 2 inches bigger with 2 inches more of reach than Jan Blachowicz, and he's going to be 4 years younger. Blachowicz is now 40 years old. So both guys primarily strikers. I mean, of course, Pereira, that's his entire game, is being a high-level, very powerful and feared kickboxer with an aggressive style. But Jan Blachowicz, largely a striker as well. He's got the Polish power. He's got power in his fists and kicks. But he does have a BJJ black belt. Just doesn't always choose to use the grappling as his main option most of the time. In fact, the last takedown that he scored was over a kickboxer in Israel Adesanya in their super fight when Israel Adesanya went up to 205 just a little over 2 years ago. Jan Blachowicz struck with him for the first 2 rounds pretty competitively, and then in round 3, 4, and 5, he mixed in the grappling and started landing some takedowns. So could that be the strategy here against Pereira? Will he test his striking early and then wrestle late? This is a 3-round fight, not a 5-round fight. So if he does that, he could fall behind on the striking count, possibly get knocked out in the first 2 rounds. And if he waits until round 3 in this fight to wrestle, it could be too late. So it's anybody's guess if he chooses to do that early. Anybody's guess to see how quickly Pereira is been developing more of his takedown defense, his get-up game, his own clinch strengths with Glover Teixeira, who he trains with. So there's a lot of narrative and question marks in this fight, partially why it's so close, right? It's minus 125 in the money line for Blachowicz, plus 105 the slight underdog for Alex Pereira, and it seems like Pereira is taking a lot of the betting love so far early this week. There's a lot of questions on either side, right? I mentioned the big one for Blachowicz is, will he wrestle and at what point of the fight? For Alex Pereira, it's a lot of the weight class issues here. It's like he's coming off of a pretty fast turnaround from getting knocked out cold from Israel Adesanya last time out. But will this lack of a drastic weight cut to 185, will that help his durability in this fight? Will this help his cardio? Will this actually make his power even more scary in this fight? I'd have to imagine all of those things have to aid him in just being that much better version of himself in this fight. So you've got the size, the striking and kickboxing of Pereira. You've got the power, the youth, and probably even the mobility and speed. I think he's just a faster mover, partially because his frame is so large. He can kind of cover distance fast. That's all going for Pereira, whereas you've got the overall pro MMA experience for Jan Blachowicz. You've got his grappling and BJJ. You've got his proven 5-round ability at the high level, and that's all going to Jan Blachowicz. So kind of makes it an even matchup as far as the pros and cons here. I'm going to lean on the side of Alex Pereira as the slight underdog. I just think he's got a very dangerous way to end this fight by knockout, but I think he's going to win a decision here, just winning at least 2 rounds to 1. Stuffing takedowns that should come up from Blachowicz, landing the better counters, and just doing the better eye-catching work on the judges' scorecards. Blachowicz, even though he's 40 years old, he might get cracked here and put away by strikes. He's only lost a couple of times by knockout, and that was to Thiago Santos years ago, and that was also to, I think it was all the way back facing Sokaju by like some sort of injury stoppage way back in the day. So, yeah, give me Pereira here. Again, this being 3 rounds, I think it favors him. and it favors me picking him. Jan Blachowicz, if this was 5 rounds and we could see, more of an ability for him to separate himself with mixing in all facets of mixed martial arts, then I think his cardio would shine. I think his strengths would shine in that type of matchup. But for 3 rounds, Pereira just has to be the bigger aggressor for just 10 minutes, just 2 rounds of that. So give me Pereira to win by decision here. No money on this fight. It's just too close to call for me with a lot of question marks. Okay, we made it all the way to the main event of UFC 291. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and let's dive into this rematch, 5 years in the making, between Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje at 155 for the potential 5 rounds of action to win the BMF symbolic title here. And we've got 2 guys who love to strike, and it should be a very exciting matchup with these guys just meeting in the center of the cage and throwing down for as long as it lasts. I mean, that's kind of what happened last time. It was a very good fight back in 2018. They headlined the card for potentially 5 rounds that night, and it only took 4 for Dustin Poirier to get the round 4 TKO pretty early into that round, and he was up on all the judges' scorecards up until that point. But it was Justin Gaethje doing what he normally does, spamming heavy leg kicks and being the aggressor, throwing huge punches, moving forward, while Dustin Poirier skirted around the perimeter of the cage, counter-striking effectively, better technical boxing, showing very good cardio and strike selection, ripping to the body, and kind of throwing more in combination with higher striking output. So it's going to be that type of battle, right? Like, there's some good things to Justin Gaethje's game, obviously the power, the aggression, and moving forward, pressuring, and just the optics of somebody being the aggressor in a fight that's close usually does very well with the judges. But the downfall is sometimes Justin Gaethje can be headhunting. He can be 1 strike at a time. He can kind of miss wildly with these big looping strikes, and that just expends a lot of energy when you miss. And then his cardio kind of does fall down a cliff, and his body language is not as good optically as the fight goes on and the momentum shifts. Now, on the other side, Dustin Poirier, this guy is very good defensively. Usually keeps the guard up nice and high. He's got a good ability to, read fighters' advances and counter-strike effectively. Like, he saw Justin Gaethje dipping his head. He'd throw that left switch high kick. He rips to the body to expose the head. He did very well in that first fight with Gaethje, and these are tools that Poirier has used throughout his career to dismantle even, equally technical strikers like Conor McGregor a couple of times. Even a guy who fought for the interim belt at 155, he fought Max Holloway and was able to, put on as much volume as Max Holloway and actually bully him over the course of 5 rounds pretty well. So that's a pretty big feather in your cap to go toe-to-toe, boxing for boxing with Max Holloway. And Dustin Poirier actually, as a southpaw striker, can complement that with a strong BJJ game should this go to the mat. I don't think it enters that realm that much. But Justin Gaethje, that's something that just baffles everybody, right? He's got a strong collegiate wrestling background, never really goes for offensive takedowns that much. But these guys have both done very well since the last time they fought. I think they've both fought about 8 times in the lightweight division. Both have only lost the title matches against Charles Oliveira and Khabib, both of them losing by submission. So, yeah, I mean, everybody else these guys are pretty much having good fights with, but Justin Gaethje always getting into a war with these guys. A guy like Michael Chandler, a guy like Rafael Fiziev most recently. It's always a close back and forth fight of the year candidate, which means that he's getting hit in return quite a bit. Dustin Poirier has a lot of clean performances. Now, against Michael Chandler almost finished Dustin Poirier early in round 1 last time, but Poirier flipped the script on him in round 1 and then managed to tap him out in round 2. Again, just showing that there's a lot of avenues for this guy to win fights. In terms of the money lines and betting odds for this fight, Dustin Poirier is a minus 160 favorite. That's since moved from minus 140 in just the past couple of days. Money coming on that side. Justin Gaethje is getting closer to that plus 140 and beyond underdog ticket. And honestly, I don't fault anybody taking the side of Gaethje as the week goes on, and that plus money keeps getting bigger and bigger in this close competitive fight. But what I did personally is I have 1.4 units on Dustin Poirier at minus 140, and I'll be honest, I don't feel very good about it. I'm not trying to sell picks or anything like that, so I can be completely transparent when I make a mistake betting-wise. The more I look at this fight, the more I see it as Like a minus 140 line for Dustin Poirier is how I would actually handicap this fight. So by playing the odds at the same number, I'm not getting much of a value on that line at all. But I also do have a 1.25 unit bet on the over 2.5 at minus 125. I think that this is a war of attrition. I think these guys are going to kind of pace each other out. And I think the defensive striking improvements that Justin Gaethje seems to have made, I think that's going to aid in him actually surviving later into this fight. And I think Dustin Poirier either wins in round 4, 5, or by decision. That's my pick for this fight. I might even look at the fight ends in round 4 and fight ends in round 5 for either guy to win here. So I think it's going to be a really fun back and forth fight, a good technical battle between two strikers, but give me Dustin Poirier to win in championship rounds or by decision. Okay, there you have it, you guys. All the fights broken down for UFC 291, Poirier versus Gaethje 2, Blachowicz versus Pereira. Make sure you guys drop a comment down below with your main and co-main event predictions. I'd love to hear where your guys' heads are at for those. There's a lot of really close fights to call on this card. The money lines I'm not overly crazy about, except for the couple I pointed out, but I like a lot of props this week, so I'll be waiting for other sportsbooks to drop lines and all of the props and specifics. So join me on Thursday night right here on this channel for the panel I'm co-hosting with Couch Warrior Podcast. We'll have two great guests, Effie from the Any Action Sportscast and Wiz Does, both who you've seen on my channel before. Very smart guys. We're going to try to line up and see where the four of us agree on and make the best bets possible. So good luck in all of your betting action. I'll talk to you guys next time. Cheers.